I've been thinking about what I want to present to you, along with doing some new work for you. Certainly you've been seeing the highly popular and very important Survivorman COVID-19. There's a lot of really useful information on those episodes, and there's more to come. But also I thought I should get to you, well, especially the real Survivorman fans, some material that originally was on the SMTV network, which is still technically pulled down, but I can put it up here and now for you, no charge, and you can enjoy it, and it can help you to, as I say, kind of while away the hours of this whole pandemic wait out thing. But in the meantime, like you, I'm at home, but I'm sitting on mountains of material and content and hopefully some entertaining work. And I'm going to continue to bring you new material, as well as this next bit. This is for the real Survivorman fans. This is a bit of retro Les Stroud Survivorman. Boy, I look younger in this thing. But I'm presenting this one. This is how to properly build a shelter. And the reason why I did this particular video, along with a couple of others, was because within the scope of the Survivorman series, when I'm going to teach anything, I really have to edit it down to a few minutes. And you cannot teach a firebow in a couple of minutes, or shelter building in a couple of minutes. Not really. If you watch all the Survivorman episodes, you could put it all together and you'd have a great piece there. Well, instead, I just went out and I taught you. So here we go. This is just to help you while away the hours. There's more Survivorman COVID-19 to come. There's more serious material to come about how to deal with this pandemic and how to survive it at home. And there's more retro material like this right now. So this is how to build a shelter. Enjoy, guys. One of the more difficult skills to teach, actually, I think, is shelter construction. And the reason being is that it's so full of variables. Whether you have a rock, whether it's warm and dry, whether it's a desert, or it's snow, or it's raining, or it's forest, jungle, all of those different aspects will change what kind of shelter you're going to make. The bottom line is, if you make a shelter that keeps you warm, keeps you dry, keeps you out of the elements, then you have a successful shelter. I've got buddies down here working on a shelter. Now I'm in sort of northern Ontario in Canada, and it's mid-fall, the leaves are all gone, weather's cool, and I have the topography and the plant life of this particular area to deal with. So it's going to change no matter where you are, but once again, just like when it comes to anything in survival, when you're dealing with the natural environment, it's all about characteristics. It's not about names or types or species, it's about characteristics. So you want to look for the characteristics of all of this available material here behind me in terms of what you're going to do for a shelter. Now, what I wanted to do here was build a shelter based on having a rock. There's a few things to consider first. If you're in a hilly area and you're down by the bottom, the cold air is going to sink down and land on you down there. If you're way up at the top and the wind picks up, you're exposed to the wind. So I tend to prefer areas just slightly down from the top a bit. So I'm out of the cold pocket, but I'm also out of the wind. And that's kind of where we are in a spot like this. In the Canadian Shield area where we are, we have the choice of using rocks. Most of the time, you don't have to walk too far to find some rocks, and that's a big bonus. And you can see here, we've got this beautiful, what they call a scatterling. The beauty I find of having a rock is that you can put a fire up against it. And it also makes a partial wall. You can heat up a rock and your fire die on you, and the rock is still giving you heat hours later, depending on how hot it got. So that is the beauty of having a rock. Surprisingly, there's very few rocks like this in the jungle. That's a different story. But then again, it never gets really cold, so all you're trying to do is get out of the rain. Here in the Canadian forests, we've got cold to deal with, especially this time of year, especially at 3 in the morning. Here's the number one thing you start with. Considering the immediate needs, you need your bed.
And it's better to start with your bed first and get your bed set and build your shelter over top of that, because it's really hard to build your bed after you have your roof up. One thing that might change that is a storm on its way in really soon. That could change that, and in that case, you might want to quickly get a semi-roof up so you get the area sort of protected. But we've got sunshine and time, so when you have that, for me, it's about leveling out an area that you can sleep in. You may have to sleep in a fetal position. If you can get it long enough for your body, that's the key, so we'll start with the bed. Let's go. So what's happening here is if you take a look at our shelter area here, all right, no shelter area is ever perfect and smooth. So what these guys are doing now is in essence, we've got to create a flattish area, which is essentially going to be a bed. Because there's two of them, they can work together. If you're two people and you have to survive, that's great. A lot of times you're alone. So it's going to be much slower work. You see how fast they're working? When you're alone, you breathe, you walk slowly, you walk deliberately. Hopefully there's not a storm coming in. You go out to get your material and you drag it back in to get it into place. So, what's that, Doug?
Should help for drainage too. You got the wet.
Yeah, good point. When you do a bed like this, what happens is if there is a downpour later and the water comes under you, well, that's what'll happen is it'll go under you. It'll go under those logs, and you can actually, I've had shelters where I've had streams actually flowing underneath me because it was a bad drainage area, but I built up the bed big enough so I never felt it. And that's key. And that's what they're doing here.
I'm going to put some boughs, some Springer woods across.
Everybody's got a different methodology for how they build a shelter. What you can do is build a shelter alone to sleep in. Do it if you can, if it's possible, in your backyard. You know, don't go way out into the bush to try this, but try building a shelter on your own. When you do that, there's some advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is there's nobody to argue with. So you're going to make it the way you want to make it. And the disadvantage is there's nobody to confer with and make sure you're doing the right thing. There's a lot of mistakes you can make, and better you make them in a safe situation.
I'm going to fishbone this a bit less. Going to have some an angle this way, then put some kind of cross beam and angle that way. A bit more spring for your comfort zone.
All it took were about half a dozen old logs to make a flattish area for the bed. But now you've got to get up off of them. You don't want to be laying on them. So in this neck of the woods, we've got evergreen boughs. Balsam, spruce, pine. For me, you know, pound for pound, spruce I like because the needles go all the way around the branch. There's more loft with spruce boughs. If you make a mattress and it's this deep, by the end of the night, and you roll around on it, you're probably going to see the ground. I've had it like that where students have built them and you can see the snow. So you need to start off, if you can, about 3 feet deep of boughs, because that's going to work its way down to be about a foot thick by the time you've rolled around on it. So bear that in mind when it comes to the bedding. This rock is a great reflective rock, so we can have a fire against it. So that's another beautiful thing you can do with a shelter is if you create a shelter that actually has a fire inside of it, it can be a blizzard outside, and you've got a small fire going keeping you warm. You may find yourself in a situation where you're building a shelter and you are, say, below the rock, or you build below, you crawl up into it. The problem with that is your fire's up here and the heat goes up. Better that you have a shelter where you're higher, going to be smoky. All survival shelters are smoky, by the way. Don't think you're going to get away from the smoke. You're not. You're going to be breathing in smoke. It's just the nature of the beast. But if your bed is slightly higher, now the heat rolls up into you, and that's the situation here. We looked at this rock and thought, well, the ground is, you know, starts to go up here. So, and with our logs and our boughs, we raise ourselves even more. Another thing you can do while you're building a shelter, I like to do a lot of times right in the beginning, is clear away all the eye pokers, everything around you that's going to be getting in your way. Make your area smooth and clean, ready to work in. So, this is what I mean by testing it out first, all right? So I can see that I can pretty much sleep like this for the night, but you notice I'm already going into fetal position. Not very many survival shelters are comfortable ever, unless you've got a lot of time to work on them and you're in for the long haul. Then you can make them comfortable, but for the first few days or the first week, your survival shelter is essentially just a place to go in and hide from the elements and hopefully get an hour or two sleep. But in this case, there we go. I've got a bed, the loft is thick, it fits my body, And as Doug was pointing out earlier, if you've got sheets of birch bark or something else you can lay down here, it keeps the pokers from sticking up in you. Any of the organic material where you're going to have your fire burning will eventually dry out and eventually start to burn. And you don't want it going underneath. So this is not a bad situation. This is kind of an ideal survival rock. Something like this can work really well. When I was looking around at possible shelter locations, came upon this rock here. This is actually also a pretty sweet shelter rock. At least it looks like it's a pretty sweet shelter rock. But the problem with this, and I've seen this happen, is that we could have a fire in there trying to keep warm. Oh, reflective heat, nice and super warm. But rocks like this can crack and calve off pieces. I mean, there's a piece laying right there that obviously came from it. And I've seen a situation where someone had a fire going in their shelter with a rock like this, happened to be out of the shelter time, came back, and there's a Volkswagen-sized piece that broke off. Pretty self-explanatory what's going on here. This end, it will be closed off, so that gives you a pocket to be in, so that the wind doesn't whistle through like some sort of tunnel. The lower end it'll be the end for coming up into. But for now, we're just basically putting these logs down like rafters and closing off enough so that they're good and strong support and will hold up the insulation material and the shingling material. One thing you can do in situations like this, you see how these poles here, they come up and they shoot up high like this. Sometimes you can get really picky about it and make them so they match in perfectly so it's a smoother overhang, but a lot of times it doesn't matter, and other times it does matter. It's really, again, about a hit and miss situation as to how much you want to bother being really meticulous with certain aspects of it. Definitely, like all aspects of survival though, the more patience, the better. Once you've got essentially enough to support, and that's what you feel you have, is enough to support, then there's no problem. Then it's time to start throwing on the boughs. They're not going to hold in a ton of heat, but they do shed rain surprisingly well. And you can see what Doug is doing here. You take your boughs, and this is when it's nice to be a little bit meticulous. You actually put them in like you're weaving them in. You go butt end to the top, so all of the boughs have this kind of downward bow to them like that, and that is your shelter, right? So because they've got to shed rain, they've got to try to keep the heat in there. And you want to work it all. You want to go from the bottom all the way up to the top. One thing you might need to remember as well is there's going to be a fire down there somewhere. So the fire will make its way out, the smoke will make its way out, I should say. It's kind of okay to have a little bit of a space there, a little bit of a hole for the smoke to go out so it's not all billowing back in your face. But you definitely will be sucking in a lot of smoke in a survival shelter. There's just no way to escape it. Once you think you've got a lot of boughs on, you can get in, look around, look for the daylight. Look to see, oh, there's a whole area here. Okay, then you come back out and fill it. Oh, and there's one over here, and fill it up. You've got to keep getting in the shelter, get in and out, make sure that it's going to fit you. That's really important. I have seen shelters before people have made, built it up, beautiful shelter. They never once check the size. They go to crawl in, they get in, and they don't fit. And that's the beauty of having more than one person when you build a shelter, is you can work together, figure out where the weak spots are of the shelter. If you're alone, it's just a lot more work. So, coming in like this, there's a few very sharp pokers here. You really want to watch out for that. Injuries in a survival situation suck. Let's put this like that. So there's daylight coming through, but those boughs have created a nice bit of loft. If I could quadruple them, I would. But we have more material that we can also use in a forest like this that will help. Now, because we're dealing with the fall of the year, that's a bonus in that we are surrounded by tons and tons of maple and oak leaves. And leaves, for me, pound for pound, are one of the best insulators in a forest like this. But it's a lot of gathering. You just got to go out, grab your bundles, keep bringing it back, putting them up here till you have a big, massive mound of leaves. They'll shed the rain in effect that they seem to soak up a lot of the rain. They take the water. They're a lot of help when it comes to keeping the rain from getting through to you, and that's key. One of the problems with this particular shelter, when you saw the rib section the way it was. It's almost a flat roof. The better the pitch of the roof, the less likely you're going to have the rain come into you if your roof has a nice sharp pitch. This one is not so sharp. It's just dealing with the environment. Usually this is the best way to do it. Just kind of walk it slowly. Careful you don't cut yourself bad doing this. And get it up there. Eventually we're going to end up to the part where we're finalizing the roof. And you'll see when I'm over there, you need shingles. And a place like this, tree like this. All right, see that? Now, it's holy, but that is better than bough branches when it comes to shitting off the rain now, isn't it? So anytime you can find sheets of bark like this on rotted logs, they work terrific as shingles. So we'll keep gathering these, even if it's just smaller pieces like this, still helps. Well, we've got at the point where lots and lots of leaves have been put over top. You want to create a lot of loft. The same thing that you do for your bedding, thick, because it's going to go down, you want to do for your roof. Thicker, thicker, thicker. The thicker, the better. And if you're in a multi-day survival situation, you never stop improving your shelter. You're always throwing something, just throw it on. Just throw more stuff on top of your shelter. I don't care if it's sticks, moss, dirt, leaves, grass. It doesn't matter. Just keep throwing stuff on top of your shelter, because the more insulation, the better. You do need at least one layer that is your waterproofing layer, your shingling layer. And if you can find pieces of bark like this, they make ideal shingles. And you treat it just like shingling a roof. You start from the bottom and you work your way up the top, one on top of the next, on top of the next, because this has to work exactly like shingles would work. The rain hits here, trickles down, trickles down, trickles down, and away from you. And you want to end up going all the way over, including protecting your fire area, which has to have a little bit of an opening at the top so the smoke can get out. But your shingles just have to keep working. So we've got leaves are really good for stopping the rain, but shingles on top of them are the key to it, and then the boughs underneath. So it's all about creating that loft, insulation, and waterproofing. Sometimes you can find yourself going to trees, and it's a big old rotted tree, and what you want to do is actually slice with a knife down the bark, and you can peel the bark right off the tree in big, big sheets. That works really well with old birch trees, actually. Old paper birch trees, you can sometimes get those big pieces of rotted bark off, and then they lay out for you. We're pretty much getting to a point here now. We've got our bed and the fire zone, the insulation underneath us, the insulation above us, the waterproofing. This took about 3.5 hours, 2 men to get this done. One guy, 6 or 7 hours? No, much longer, because you're only one, and so the speed at which you work is much slower. So now I'm talking about 7, 8, 9, 10 hours to make a shelter. We'll do the math. How much sunlight do you have in the day? When are you starting to build? If you're not starting to build your shelter until 3 p.m., then you're not going to have an incredible shelter by the time the night falls. So you want to get a fire going, maybe start with a basic lean-to situation, and then build up. This is sort of the almost ideal. You can crawl in, you can get out of the wind, you can have a fire inside, you're protected from all angles, and that makes it a really good shelter. On the other hand, I've had times where it's just a big fire and a wall behind me and the fire in front of me, and that's it. And it's not going to rain, hopefully, so you sleep through the night. Another thing you want to consider in a shelter like this, if you take a look at this thing, from afar, it completely blends in with the surroundings. You can't see it. Is that good or bad? Well, it's great if you're in escape and evasion and you don't want to be seen, but it's bad if you want to be seen. So remember that when you're in your shelter, you are invisible to the outside world. No one is going to find you from an air search. Even on the ground, you can walk right by this. And if it's dusk or getting dark, absolutely, you could almost walk right over top of them sometimes. Best thing if you can is to hang some flagging around the area. If you've got an orange coat, put it up on a tree, whatever you can to bring attention to where you are. Because the reality is, this shelter is one big piece of camouflage. Okay, now, I've actually had to switch to night shot in this camera because the reality is it's actually dark in here. But that is a good thing. If it's dark, it means that most of the air holes have been covered over, and that means that the warmer air will stay in here with me. This is not a bad shelter. Even the fact that I have a bit of a space up in here behind my head, that's good because I can shove firewood up in there. If I've got my own little survival pouch or whatever, I can put it up in there and keep it. So it sounds a little silly, but actually having a bit of room to live in and work within is helpful. If you're so cramped that you can't even move, I'm going to say, don't do that. I'm going to say, okay, well, no, it's tighter and no airspace to heat up. Well, you know what? There comes a point where it becomes ridiculous. So you've got to have some room to live and breathe. You are human. You need space. You don't want to be claustrophobic. So you can't just, tuck in and ignore things like claustrophobia. On one occasion, I found myself in a shelter, a snow shelter in Labrador, that I had to almost, I say run out of, but crawl out as fast as I could, because I was becoming claustrophobic. I mean, everything was so tight to me. The wall was right in front of my face. And I was just like, oh, this is too claustrophobic. I can't handle this. So you've got to have some room to live and breathe. All right. Let's get a little fire going. It's very easy to set your shelter on fire. It is a big tinder bundle. So your fires have to be kept very, very small. And you have to have a place for the flames to lick up without touching onto dry tinder or your branches and boughs. These green boughs will go up like crazy and create an inferno in no time. The benefit and the beauty of being able to get a small survival fire going in your shelter, of course, is the heat. It all reflects off this rock. And within moments of this fire going right now, I had a little bit of a chill just laying on this ground, and it's knocked out of me. The last thing that I might want to do in a shelter like this is have a bit of old log or something like that I can pull up against the doorway and actually close off the door. And that way there's no drafts. Everything is closed off. The flames right now are far too big. The fire's got to take a bit. I'll let it settle down. So you never ever mess with putting a fire in a shelter until you're very, very comfortable and skilled at dealing with fire itself. But for now, this is home, and it's not bad. Not bad at all. Good night.